While the public would have been thrilled with a sequel to Snow White, or anything to do with the Seven Dwarfs, he went in other directions. And he had already started planning other productions, other films, and acquiring other properties. One of the properties he acquired was Felix Salten's book, Bambi. And he understood something about that property almost immediately. It would require a different, as you saw, a different kind of artwork. Something entirely new, something that they had never tried before. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew it had to be different. He knew certain basics. He knew that his artist had to be able to draw convincingly a deer and the other forest animals that would inhabit the story. But there was a balance that had to be reached between a realistic-looking deer and a cartoon character. He wanted some sort of happy medium, something that satisfied both needs. And that was not so easily accomplished. They brought deer to the studio. They did. They brought 2 deer to the studio, which was then the Hyperion Avenue studio, and gave the animators a chance to study them up close. And he realized that was going to be a problem too, because really he didn't want the way the deer acted as pets. He wanted the way they acted in the wild, and the way they behaved, and the way their expressions, if you will, as well as their movement. So more experimentation. And when he realized it was going to take that kind of experimentation, he took a handful of his artists, and this is one of his great gifts, was not only recognizing talent, but channeling talent into different areas, sometimes into areas that the people themselves didn't anticipate and didn't seek out. He took a handful of his best artists, including Mark Davis, Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, some of the other those are 3 of the famous 9 old men, the great Disney directing animators. And he actually decided he wanted to cut them off from everything else that was going on at the studio. And he rented space on Seward Street, where there were a lot of other film companies and some other animation studios. And so they were there by themselves, just working on Bambi. No distractions. And Mark Davis, who I had the privilege of interviewing on this stage for the first of the Mark Davis animation lectures, loved telling the story about the fact that, now, Walt was famous for sneaking around the artists' offices and cubicles at night. He did this all the time. And sometimes he'd reach into the waste bin and pull out a drawing that someone had crumpled up that he liked. I said, no, don't throw this away. Keep this. So he was ubiquitous. But they had one advantage at this Seward Street facility. One of the steps leading up to their, I guess, second story cubicles or offices was a little out of alignment. And every time they were actually still present in the office, maybe working late into the night, Walt would trip on this step. And Mark Davis said they would say to each other, "Man is in the forest." And that's when they knew Walt was coming. Sit up a little straighter, get your act together. Eventually they came back to the new studio in Burbank, the newly built studio in Burbank. But if you're wondering, if you're interested in the work of those great animator artists, you'll notice that they did not work on Fantasia, and they did not work on Dumbo. That's because they were off by themselves, just trying to lick all the challenges of doing Bambi. Amazing. Just amazing. He also understood, and so did the people who were working for him, that it needed an entirely different kind of soundtrack. Entirely different. Snow White, one of the reasons that Snow White was a hit, and I think it was a hit so quickly, were the songs. Those songs got tremendous play on radio. They sold sheet music. They sold records. Hi Ho, Hi Ho. All of those songs were tremendously popular. They became, everybody was singing and whistling them. Bambi needed a different kind of score. Bambi needed to have songs, but they needed to be not necessarily hit parade songs, more lyrical, something entirely different. And yet, it was people on his staff, Frank Churchill and Larry Morey, who wrote those songs. They gave him what he wanted and needed for this film.